Welcome back to Criminally Curious and our continuing podcast presentation of A Death on Redstone Arsenal. This is Part 2, Under Scrutiny. In Part 1, The Soldier and the System, we laid the foundation. We talked about who Specialist 4th Class Chad Langford was, the training he received as a military police officer, and the Army law enforcement system responsible for investigating his death. We walked through the early days of the investigation and the information that first began to complicate what initially appeared on the surface to be a straightforward case. If you haven't listened to Part 1 yet, I strongly recommend starting there. This episode picks up exactly where that story left off. I'm your host, Michael Fleming, former Marine and private investigator. As I mentioned in the first episode, this is a case I've followed for most of my life. It happened here in Alabama. It unfolded within a system I would later come to know professionally, and it never fully made sense, especially once you look beyond the headlines. In Part 2, we return to the investigation as it continued after the initial shock faded. We'll follow Army Criminal Investigation Division agents as they conduct additional interviews, including their interviews with Chad Langford's parents. We'll examine how investigators followed up on earlier statements, what they were able to verify, what they could not, and what new information emerged as scrutiny intensified. This episode also explores a critical turning point, the moment when investigators with real experience and authority began looking not just around Chad Langford, but directly at him. What they uncovered, and when they confronted him, would become central to how the Army ultimately interpreted his death. This episode contains descriptions of graphic violence and discusses themes of suicide and criminal behavior. Listener discretion is advised. As before, aliases are used to protect the identities and privacy of individuals who have never been publicly named in connection with this case. This remains a multi-episode investigation because accuracy matters, context matters, and the only way to understand why this case still raises questions is to walk through the evidence the same way investigators did, step by step. So, settle in. It's time to be criminally curious. When we left off, the Army's first investigation into the death of Specialist 4th Class Chad Langford was still unfolding. Investigators had secured the scene on Redstone Arsenal, documented the physical evidence, and begun interviewing the people who knew Chad best: his supervisors, fellow soldiers, and the women he was dating in the weeks before his death. What emerged was not a single coherent version of Chad Langford, but several. A disciplined military policeman, a young man telling exaggerated stories, someone who spoke openly about danger, about enemies, and about criminal activity that no one else could confirm. And buried within those early interviews, a claim that raised the stakes of the investigation, a supposed plan to rob an MP money escort from the inside. In Part 1, we focused on who Chad Langford was, the training he received, and the military law enforcement system responsible for investigating his death. We ended at the point where the investigation shifted from confusion to consequence. The alleged money escort plot forced CID to confront two very different possibilities: that Chad Langford was entangled in criminal planning that no one had fully seen, or that his self-mythologizing had escalated into something reckless and psychologically revealing. In either case, the story was no longer just about appearances. In Part 2, we pick up the investigation on March 16, 1992, as CID agents continue their work in the days and months that followed. we'll examine the additional interviews conducted as the case progressed, including the Army's interviews with Chad's parents. We'll follow investigators as they attempt to verify or disprove the claims made in earlier statements, tracing which stories collapsed under scrutiny and which ones refused to disappear. But Part 2 also reveals something far more consequential. As CID dug deeper, they uncovered that Chad Langford was not just the subject of rumors or speculation. He had come to the attention of the very investigators at the Provost Marshal's office, who did have the training, authority, and experience for the kind of law enforcement work Langford wanted others to believe he was involved in. Those investigators had been looking at him, and by early March, they had reached a point in that inquiry where Chad Langford was formally put on notice. What CID would later come to understand is that this confrontation, this moment when the image Langford had constructed collided with reality, became the clearest catalyst in the chain of events that followed, and a critical lens through which his death would ultimately be interpreted. This is the rest of the first investigation. The questions it raised, and the answers the Army believed it had. On March 16th, agents interviewed a staff sergeant from the 515th Ordnance Company on Redstone. We will refer to this person as Staff Sergeant Halvern. Halvern had been stationed with Langford in Korea. He said that he saw Langford in his MP sedan outside the troop barracks around 6:15 p.m. the day he died. Halvern said that Langford stopped and they talked for a few minutes. Langford told him that he was pissed off because he could not go to airborne or air assault school. Halvern said Langford told him that he had put in for a stateside swap to California, and that if he could not leave Redstone Arsenal soon, he would get out of the Army and come back in as an officer. The conversation ended with the two shaking hands and Staff Sergeant Halvern telling Langford to take it easy. Agents then interviewed a private that we will call Brevlin, who had known Langford for about 6 months and had become good friends with him. Brevlin and Langford spent some of their off-duty time together, to include going to Alabama A&M University to date women going to school there. Brevlin also said that he went with Langford to the enlisted club on numerous occasions. Brevlin saw Langford around 3:30 p.m. on the day he died, and they talked about their plans for the upcoming weekend. Brevlin said he also saw Langford in his MP patrol vehicle about 7:45 p.m. in the area of the MP station on the night he died. Brevlin said that he was never told by Langford that he was going to die. The same day, March 16, 1992, evidence collected during the investigation was transported to Fort Gillem, Georgia, to the U.S. Army Criminal Investigation Laboratory, or USACIL, the only full-service criminal forensic lab within the Department of Defense. The Fort Gillem lab performs forensic testing of evidence for criminal cases involving all DoD military personnel worldwide. Accredited consistently since 1985 and internationally under ISO standards since 2011, USACIL's mission is to apply state-of-the-art science to help solve felony crimes involving military personnel worldwide. The lab's capabilities span dozens of forensic disciplines, from DNA and latent print analysis to firearms and toolmark testing, trace evidence, questioned documents, drug chemistry, and advanced digital evidence processing. Technicians at USACIL also support Army CID and other military investigators with forensic photography and 3D crime scene mapping, and forensic examiners regularly testify as expert witnesses in federal, military, and state courts. Tracing its origins back to World War II and the early Army crime laboratories, USACIL today handles evidence submissions from criminal cases across the globe and prioritizes rapid, accurate analysis to help investigators piece together what happened at crime scenes. In recent years, process improvements have significantly reduced evidence turnaround time, allowing investigators to receive results in weeks rather than months. The lab also plays a role in training and outreach, providing courses for CID special agents and educational briefings for military judges to ensure forensic science is understood and used effectively in investigations and trials. While specific headline cases tied to USACIL's work are not often publicized due to legal sensitivities, it has routinely provided critical forensic support in military criminal prosecutions and served as the authoritative forensic reference for complex cases involving DNA, latent prints, and other scientific evidence. Its work not only aids in identifying perpetrators, but also in exonerating the innocent, underscoring the vital role scientific analysis plays in military justice. Also, on March 16th, CID requested a psychological autopsy, a posthumous reconstruction of a person's mental state based on records and interviews. The psychological autopsy was performed by Army mental health personnel. A psychological autopsy is not a medical autopsy, and it is not a criminal investigation by itself. It is a retrospective analytical tool used after a death, most often when the manner of death is unclear and suicide is being considered. Psychological autopsies are typically performed by mental health professionals such as psychologists or psychiatrists, sometimes in consultation with investigators, and are based entirely on secondary information. The subject is never evaluated directly. Instead, the analyst reviews records and interviews to reconstruct the decedent's mental state in the days, weeks, or months leading up to death. The materials reviewed in a psychological autopsy usually include medical and mental health records, disciplinary or employment files, personal writings, phone records, and interviews with family members, friends, co-workers, and supervisors. Analysts look for indicators such as expressed hopelessness, prior suicidal ideation, significant stressors, recent losses, behavioral changes, substance abuse, or preparations for death. Importantly, the process relies heavily on interpretation. The same behavior can be viewed either as future-oriented or as preparatory, depending on the framework the evaluator applies. Psychological autopsies do not establish facts in the way forensic evidence does. They offer an opinion about likelihood, not certainty. In homicide investigations, particularly within the military, psychological autopsies often play a supporting role rather than a decisive one. In military cases, they are frequently requested when investigators are trying to determine whether a death should be classified administratively as suicide, accident, homicide, or undetermined. Unlike civilian jurisdictions, the military has institutional reasons to resolve manner of death questions even when criminal culpability cannot be established, and psychological autopsies are sometimes used to fill evidentiary gaps when physical evidence is ambiguous. On March 17th, CID agents confronted the members of the alleged money escort heist conspiracy. They started by interviewing a private assigned to the 902nd Military Intelligence Detachment on Redstone. We will call him Private Carswell. Carswell gave a sworn statement describing the conversations he had with Langford, Whitmar, and Van Scott concerning the possible robbery of a post-money escort. Carswell also stated that he was in his barracks room during the evening of March 12th because he was on restriction and could not leave the room. a female MP would verify that alibi on March 23rd. Agents then interviewed Specialist Whitmar. He also provided a sworn statement describing the conversations with Langford, Scott, and Carswell about robbing a money escort on post. CID then re-interviewed Specialist Scott for the third time. Once again, agents collected a sworn statement regarding Scott's knowledge and involvement in a discussion with Langford, Whitmar, and Carswell to rob a money escort on post. On March 19th, agents re-interviewed Specialist Talrow, the soldier that previously told them Langford said he was going to die soon. Talrow provided a sworn statement describing the circumstances of Langford's visit to his room on March 7th, when he said he was going to die soon. Talrow also provided information about how he discovered a possible conspiracy to commit robbery, which he relayed to Corporal Morrick on the evening of March 14th. On March 21st, agents interviewed Sergeant Quintus, who assisted GS-7 Ashcombe on a traffic stop during the lockdown after Langford was found shot. Quintus echoed the same details that Ashcombe had provided, adding that he did in fact take the soldier's military ID card and told him to report to the MP station the following morning to retrieve it. He couldn't recall anything about the vehicle or the identity of the soldier. Sergeant Quintus said that he had since checked on his patrol report for that evening, but that he had failed to locate anything regarding the identity of the soldier or the vehicle that was stopped. Finally, Sergeant Quintus said that the next morning, the MP on the desk failed to obtain identifying information pertaining to the soldier when he came to pick up his ID. On the morning of March 23rd, agents interviewed Langford's former girlfriend, Roxanne. Roxanne told investigators that her and Langford were steady between November 1991 and the end of January 1992, and that they had discussed marriage during the relationship, but that they had drifted slowly apart. Roxanne said that the breakup was mutual, although Langford told her, "Since I lost you, I don't have anything." She said that Langford also told her that he was going to turn into a hood again. Roxanne said that Langford had told her that he had been on the streets before and knows how they work. She said the last time she talked to Langford was on Saturday, March 7th, at the Enlisted Club, where they engaged in small talk and discussed the possibility of seeing each other again. She had also seen Langford 2 weekends before his death, and said that he told her he was having dreams about dying while he was on MP duty, and that if he died, he would only make it to the back page of a newspaper. Langford explained to her that if you are famous, then your death makes the headlines, and if you live to get old, you get wrinkled and have arthritis problems. But if you die young and live life in the fast lane, then you enjoy life to the fullest. Roxanne said that Langford tried to call her around 3 p.m. on March 12th, but she wasn't home, so Langford left a message on her answering machine and asked her how she was, and said he would get back with her later. Before the interview ended, Roxanne stated that Langford always wore rosary beads and that she had never seen him without them on. In the afternoon on March 23rd, agents talked to Langford's girlfriend from Alabama A&M University, Ms. Stockmere. Stockmere said that she had been dating Langford since March 8th. She said the two had small talk each day from March 8th to March 10th, but she didn't talk to Langford at all on March 11th. On March 12th, the day Langford was shot, she contacted Langford through his pager around 6 p.m., and they engaged in small talk, and nothing significant was said. She again paged Langford around 8 p.m. that night from a different telephone number. and she was contacted by someone from the MP desk who asked that she call Langford at a new telephone number, which she did. Langford answered and told her he would see her around 11:30 p.m. after he finished his shift. Langford told her that he loved and missed her. Stockmere said that she didn't detect any fear in Langford's voice, and he seemed to be talking normally. She didn't learn about his death until about 10:55 a.m. on March 13th. The telephone number that Stockmere called Langford on that night was a payphone in the civilian recreation area of Redstone, less than a 5-minute drive from where Langford was found. Where the road to the recreation area intersects with the road that Langford was found on is where his brassard, radio, and ID were located. On March 24th, agents talked to Specialist Langford's father, Jim Langford. Mr. Langford told CID that his son called him on March 2nd and told him that he was on a special assignment and that it was drug-related. He said another MP was also on this special assignment, and he sounded very scared and asked to have more money placed into his checking account. Mr. Langford said that his son had been calling him regularly until about 2 months before his death. Specialist Langford called his father in January 1992 and said that he had been arrested and was in jail with 3 other people for carrying concealed weapons and drug charges. Mr. Langford said that his son told him that he spent 9 hours in a local jail because he could not reach his Army contact. Specialist Langford also told his father that if the other 3 people arrested with him found out who he was, he would be killed immediately. About 3 or 4 weeks prior to his death, Langford told his dad he had received several phone calls and letters that threatened his life. Mr. Langford said his son told him that he told his commanding officer about these incidents and that he was advised to buy a gun to carry off duty to protect himself. Langford also told his dad that he had to get his ear pierced for this special assignment and that he was dating a girl that was his commanding officer's daughter. Finally, Specialist Langford told his father that he planned to visit in May. The next day, March 25th, agents again interviewed Langford's platoon sergeant, Sergeant First Class Thorne. They asked him about the status of a request for airborne and air assault school made previously by Langford. Thorne said that Langford had requested those schools about 2 months previously, but that the request was turned down because the unit was severely under strength. Thorne said that several other MPs were also denied school seats because of the personnel shortage. He also provided information concerning the last time that Langford fired and qualified with his assigned pistol, which was on March 3rd, when Langford scored 48 out of a possible 50 hits, qualifying as an expert. CID also interviewed a woman we will call Ms. Yarrowick, who was a civilian that paged Langford on March 12th. She said that she had known Langford since late February when they met at the MP station concerning a traffic ticket she was issued. She had also met Langford at the enlisted club on post, and she talked to him on several other occasions. She stated that they had never gone out on a date. She called Langford around 1:30 p.m. on March 12th and talked to him for about 10 minutes. Langford told her that she could come by the MP station later in the evening after she finished her night college class, and that she and Langford were then going to talk about going somewhere on a date later in the evening after Langford got off work. She decided later not to meet with Langford and beeped his pager to tell him, but she didn't see or talk with him again. Also, on March 25th, a CID special agent assigned to the San Francisco office conducted a check of the California law enforcement tracking system. That check showed there was no criminal record on file for Langford. On March 26th, investigators spoke with Specialist Langford's mother Linda Langford. She told agents that her son would call about every 7 to 10 days and write her a letter every once in a while. Langford called his mom in January 1992 and sounded very disturbed. He told her, "If they find out that I'm an MP, I'm dead." He also told her that he did not volunteer for the undercover assignment and that it was drug-related. Langford told her that he was forced to leave the barracks and live off post for protection reasons, and he was supposed to be in touch with his Army contact once a month. He said that he was in the mess hall with another MP when they were approached by a man with a knife who said, "I'm going to get you someday," or something like that. Langford said he complained to his commanding officer about threatening telephone calls and letters, and was advised that he should buy a gun to carry while he was off duty. Mrs. Langford said that her son also told her that a camera was mounted above his barracks door to photograph anyone leaving a note on his door or attempting to break into the room. He said he wasn't supposed to talk about being undercover because he was involved with narcotics trafficking. Mrs. Langford said that her son told her that he would have his mail secretly delivered to an off-post location and would have to destroy the mail shortly afterwards so that no one could trace the return address to Redstone Arsenal. Specialist Langford told his mother that if people found out that he was an MP, he would be killed, and that once he completed this assignment, he would be transferred to another duty station. Agents then re-interviewed Specialist Ben Scott, asking for his whereabouts on March 12th. He said he was in his barracks room from 4:30 p.m. until 8:40 p.m. when Sergeant Drelson came to his room and told him that something had happened to Langford. Drelson had been interviewed by CID on March 14th and had already told agents that he went to Ben Scott's room and told him about Langford before he left to go to the scene. Agents also re-interviewed Specialist Whitmar on March 26th. Whitmar was one of the soldiers supposedly involved with Langford, Ben Scott, and Carswell in the money van heist conspiracy. Agents asked Whitmar where he was the evening of March 12th. He said that he was at the enlisted club from about 6 p.m. until 9:30 p.m. He said that he heard of Langford being shot from one of the responding MPs later that evening. Also, on March 26th, CID agents contacted the Juvenile Division of the Glenn County Sheriff's Office in Willow, California. A review of their local records turned up no record pertaining to Langford. On March 27th, special agents from CID contacted the Huntsville Police Department, Madison County Sheriff's Office, and the Alabama Bureau of Investigation. All three agencies verified that Langford never worked for them in an undercover capacity or as a law enforcement officer. CID also made a thorough review of their own records and those of the Redstone Arsenal PMO, finding no record at all of Langford working as an undercover narcotics officer. The Huntsville Police Department confirmed to CID agents that Langford was stopped by them in February 1992 while acting in a suspicious manner in a used car lot in South Huntsville. The police stopped Langford at night in his personal vehicle, and during that stop, Langford had an AK-47 rifle in the back seat of his car. Again, Langford was not arrested, but the matter was referred to his unit for proper disposition. Special agents also conducted a name check of Langford through the U.S. Army Crime Records Center and the National Crime Information Center, or NCIC. There were no records pertaining to Langford in either system. In the CID file, a note from the agents reiterates a point that is not only common sense, it's backed by both Army doctrine and best practice of any law enforcement agency.
It would never be the policy of any law enforcement agency to employ an officer in the capacity of a uniformed patrolman while at the same time using that person in the role of an undercover narcotics officer. The two roles are incompatible and would only serve to defeat the purpose of the undercover role.
That point isn't trivial. Across both military and civilian law enforcement, there is a long-standing and well-established understanding that uniformed patrol work and undercover narcotics operations cannot coexist in the same officer. Undercover assignments are some of the most specialized, controlled, and dangerous roles in law enforcement. They require officers to disappear as police, not be seen as police. That work depends on advanced training in building and maintaining cover identities, sustaining believable false personas over time, navigating criminal environments without backup, recognizing when an identity has been compromised, and managing the psychological strain that comes with prolonged deception. Officers selected for undercover roles are almost always experienced investigators, not entry-level patrol officers, and they are deliberately kept away from public-facing duties so they are not recognized or exposed. Army doctrine reflects that same reality. Military policing doctrine in the late 1980s and early 1990s treated specialized investigative or high-risk roles as command-directed assignments that required additional screening, experience, and training beyond basic military police qualification. The basic military police officer course was designed to produce uniformed general duty MPs whose job was visible law enforcement, patrol, gate operations, traffic enforcement, and installation security. The curriculum focused on authority, procedure, and overt presence. It did not teach undercover tradecraft, informant handling, assumed identities, or covert narcotics work, because those skills are incompatible with routine patrol duties and require a completely different operational framework. Because of that, it would never be the policy of a law enforcement agency, military or civilian, to use the same person as a uniformed patrol officer while also employing them as an undercover narcotics operative. The two roles undermine each other. Patrol work makes an officer known. Undercover work depends on anonymity. Based on how law enforcement actually functions and on what military police were trained and authorized to do at the time, there is no realistic scenario in which Chad Langford could have been operating in an undercover capacity. He did not have the training, the experience, or the institutional placement required for that kind of role, and the structure of military law enforcement itself makes the idea operationally unsound. The military prides itself on planning and executing successful missions. Undertaking a mission that won't likely succeed is a product of Hollywood fantasy, not military reality. As previously mentioned, basic military police officers were also not trained to conduct investigations beyond those required for routine, uniformed operations like patrol and traffic enforcement. Basic MPs aren't traffic accident investigators, vice and homicide investigators, or investigators of sexual crimes, fraud, or internet crimes. They receive minimal training to conduct first contact type investigative functions like interviewing victims and witnesses and documenting crime scenes and evidence. Military investigators like the special agents with CID or senior MPs with investigative training that are assigned to the investigations branch within PMO are the ones that plan, oversee, and conduct those types of specialized investigations. With that in mind, special agents from CID talked directly with the provost marshal investigator regarding Langford, and he provided documentation reflecting that he suspected Langford of damage and larceny of private property in connection to a series of vehicle break-ins on the base, based on the break-ins occurring in Langford's general patrol area, always while he was on duty, and because he had been stopped by the Huntsville Police Department for prowling around a used car lot at nighttime. That investigator revealed that on March 3rd, he had advised Langford of his rights and that he was a suspect in connection with those break-ins, at which time Langford said he wanted an attorney. Langford was not formally charged for the break-ins yet. The investigator read Langford his Article 31 rights, which are the military equivalent to Miranda rights. However, Article 31 rights predate Miranda and are triggered by suspicion alone, where Miranda rights require law enforcement custody of a suspect. This is why a civilian law enforcement officer can have voluntary conversations, field interviews, knock and talks, any discussion in the early stage of a traffic stop, and interviews with witnesses, all without reading a person their Miranda rights. But for military members and those subject to the Uniform Code of Military Justice, if someone suspects you of a crime and talks to you without advising you of your Article 31 rights, it's very likely that those conversations cannot be used during court-martial. Under Article 31 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, military personnel have the right to remain silent, the right to know the nature of the accusation, and the right to know that any statement made can be used in a trial by court-martial. While Article 31 does not include the right to counsel, military members retain that constitutional right, and that is usually included on Article 31 notification cards. Having your Article 31 rights read to you as an active duty member of the military is an eye-opening moment, a gut punch. It puts you on notice that you are under investigation, and those investigations are real and have immediate consequences, even if you are never convicted in a court-martial. There's no doubt in my mind that March 3rd was a very bad day for Langford. On April 2nd, agents made contact with one of Langford's former supervisors while he was stationed in Korea, whom we will call Sergeant Merriwell. Merriwell described Langford as a hard charger and stated that he had no problems with him while Langford was assigned to the 2nd MP Company at Camp Casey, Korea. Agents also conducted a law enforcement check of Langford's background at the Camp Casey Provost Marshal Office. They had no records on file pertaining to Langford. A few days later, agents interviewed a different specialist that had been with Langford in Korea. We will call him Specialist Tamsinor. Tamsinor told agents that at one point while Langford was stationed in Korea, he was in a very depressed mood and swallowed a bottle of Tylenol and had to seek medical attention for the overdose. A review of Langford's medical records on April 22nd revealed that there was no evidence that Langford was ever treated for an overdose of Tylenol tablets while stationed in Korea. On April 13th, CID agents interviewed Specialist Langford's stepmother. Her and Langford's father married when Langford was 6 years old. She said she last spoke to Langford the week of February 16th, and she often wrote to him, with the last letter being on February 29th. She said that starting in December 1991, Langford repeatedly told her on the phone that if he ever got shot, to sue the Army for all you can. He also told her that he had requested a bulletproof vest, but they won't do it. They say, "I don't need it." She said that she believed that suicide would have been out of character for Langford, and that he never seemed upset when he called home, and he often spoke about his future after getting out of the service. She denied that Langford had ever told her about working undercover narcotics for any law enforcement agency or being threatened by anyone. On April 16th, agents re-interviewed the MP radio operator the night Langford was shot, Specialist Lornell. The news had reported that there was a garbled radio transmission after Langford radioed that he was checking on a stalled vehicle. Lornell stated there was never a garbled transmission. He also answered questions about something he wrote in his sworn statement on March 14th, specifically that on his way to the scene after Langford was found, he had made a traffic stop of an unidentified civilian employee that worked on Redstone. Lornell explained that the only reason he stopped the vehicle was to determine if he had seen an MP vehicle in the area and not because the vehicle was suspicious. Lornell said he had seen the employee before in the south end of Redstone Arsenal, but could not identify the employee or his organization. On May 21, 1992, USACIL finalized their report on the evidence. The findings showed that gunshot residue was found on the swabbings taken from Langford's right palm, left back, and left palm of his hands. The lab also concluded that the bloodstain pattern found at the crime scene revealed a point of origin from the exit wound was over the center of the large blood pool that Langford was found in, at a height not greater than 18 inches off the ground. That height would be consistent with the victim being in a sitting or partially reclining position facing west. A second point of origin was determined from an analysis of the bloodstains on the side of the vehicle. That point of origin was determined to be at a height not greater than 39 inches and is consistent with backspatter from the entrance wound. The lab's examination of Langford's assigned .45 caliber pistol revealed that it was operational and had been fired since it was last cleaned. The 2 expended cartridge cases found at the crime scene were determined to have been fired by Langford's duty weapon. A follow-up report dated June 1, 1992, revealed that no bloodstains were found on Langford's duty pistol. Also, on June 1st, special agents checked again with the investigations branch at Redstone Arsenal's PMO, and again confirmed that Langford was not working covertly in any capacity for the Provost Marshal Office. On June 10th, the psychological autopsy concluded that Langford had carefully engineered his death and staged the scene to make it appear he had been murdered because he did not want to be remembered as someone who took his own life. From CID's perspective, the contradictions in Chad Langford's life were not evidence of a hidden operation or an outside threat, but of a young soldier losing control of the story he had been telling. By July 10, 1992, 4 months after Chad Langford's death, the U.S. Army Criminal Investigation Division believed it had its answer. The initial investigation was complete. Dozens of interviews had been conducted. Friends, supervisors, girlfriends, fellow soldiers, trainees, and family members had all been questioned. Physical evidence had been cataloged. Timelines had been reconstructed. Chad Langford's movements on the night of March 12th had been tracked minute by minute. And CID reached a conclusion. They determined that Specialist 4th Class Chad Langford had died by suicide. The staging at the roadway, the note in his room, the rosary, the phone calls, the pager, the unresolved investigations, the exaggerations and lies that had begun to unravel. In CID's assessment, taken together, those elements pointed not to an ambush, not to a cover-up, not to an unknown attacker, but to a young soldier who saw his options closing in and chose his own ending. That conclusion was formalized in the July 10, 1992 report. For the Army, the case was effectively resolved. For Chad's father, Jim Langford, it was anything but. From the beginning, he rejected the idea that his son had taken his own life. He did not believe Chad was suicidal. He did not believe the scene made sense. He did not believe the Army had asked the right questions or asked them deeply enough. And he did not believe that the contradictions in Chad's life automatically added up to self-destruction. In Jim Langford's view, the investigation stopped too soon, and the conclusion came too easily. The first public account of Chad Langford's death appeared within hours of his body being found. On March 13, 1992, the Huntsville Times reported that a military police officer had been found dead beside his patrol car on Redstone Arsenal, and that the Army Criminal Investigation Division was investigating. The article said that investigators have not yet ruled whether the shooting was a murder or was self-inflicted, while carefully noting that the investigation was ongoing. The framing was cautious, but the implication was already present. From the very first story, suicide was introduced to the public as a possible explanation. In the days that followed, coverage remained sparse and tightly controlled. Subsequent Huntsville Times articles in mid-March reiterated that CID was investigating and that officials have not ruled out any possibilities. But the same articles continued to describe the death as an apparent suicide. One report noted that Langford was a young military policeman with no known history of mental illness, while another quoted base officials emphasizing that there was no indication of foul play. These phrases appeared repeatedly, reinforcing a narrative of tragic self-destruction even as the investigation was still unfolding. By late March and early April, the public story began to stabilize. Articles described Langford as well-liked and professional, while also acknowledging that his death had raised questions among co-workers. Those questions, however, were never specified. The reporting did not describe the physical layout of the scene in detail. There was no mention of equipment being staged in the roadway, no reference to contradictory witness statements, and no discussion of Langford's behavior in the days leading up to his death beyond general character descriptions. What readers were given was a surface-level portrait: a young soldier, a shocking death, and an investigation moving quietly forward. As spring turned into early summer, coverage became even more restrained. Short updates in May and June noted that CID continues to investigate and that findings had not yet been released. The language was institutional and non-committal. There were no revelations, no leaks, and no indication that investigators were pursuing anything beyond confirming the initial assessment. Importantly, nothing in the public reporting during this period hinted at the internal concerns CID was documenting. The public was not told that Langford had been exaggerating or lying to peers. There was no mention of weapons, drugs, or criminal rumors, and there was no suggestion that Langford himself had been under scrutiny by law enforcement. By the time July arrived, the tone had subtly shifted again. On or just after July 10, 1992, the Huntsville Times reported that the Army had concluded its investigation and had ruled Chad Langford's death a suicide. The wording was definitive. The investigation was described as complete. CID's work was portrayed as finished. For the public, this was the end of the story. After July 10, 1992, newspaper coverage took on a new but still limited focus. Articles published in mid-July reported that the Army has ruled the death a suicide, often pairing that statement with brief reassurances that CID had conducted a thorough investigation. One Huntsville Times article noted that the conclusion came after months of investigation, leaving readers with the impression that all relevant questions had been asked and answered. It was only after that conclusion became public that Jim Langford's objections entered the record. Later July articles identified him by name and reported that he disagrees with the Army's finding. He was quoted expressing disbelief that his son would take his own life and frustration that the Army's explanation did not align with what he knew about Chad. The framing, however, was telling. His objections were presented as emotional and personal, not evidentiary. The articles did not suggest that his concerns were shared by investigators or supported by undisclosed facts. Through August and September, the pattern continued. When the case was mentioned, it was almost always in the context of a grieving father who refuses to accept the ruling. The Army's position was described as settled. The investigation was referred to in the past tense. No articles during this period reported new investigative activity, follow-up interviews, or unresolved leads. To the public, the case appeared closed. By November 1992, coverage had largely faded. The suicide ruling had hardened into accepted fact, and Jim Langford's efforts were portrayed as a personal crusade rather than part of an ongoing investigative process. Nothing in the public record suggested that CID was still actively working the case. Nothing indicated that additional reports were being generated. And nothing prepared the public or Chad's family for the reality that the investigation was not, in fact, over. By late November of 1992, the public record had gone quiet. The Army had ruled Chad Langford's death a suicide. The investigation had been labeled final. Newspapers had moved on. And to anyone looking from the outside, the case appeared settled. Another tragic but resolved loss inside a closed system. But beneath that surface, the story did not end. What the public never saw, and what Jim Langford would slowly come to realize, was that questions were still being asked. Information was still being evaluated. Leads were still being followed. Even as the Army spoke in the language of closure, CID continued to document, to verify, and to quietly revisit elements of the case that refused to stay buried. And increasingly, those efforts were being shaped not by routine procedure, but by persistence. Jim Langford did not accept the July 10th conclusion. He did not stop asking questions, and he did not let the contradictions in his son's life be dismissed as mere coincidence. Instead, he began doing what institutions rarely expect from grieving parents. He started connecting dots, tracking documents, and bringing forward information that the system itself had overlooked or set aside. In Part 3, we follow what happened next. We'll examine the supplemental CID reports that were generated after the case was supposedly closed. We'll look at the leads CID continued to pursue behind the scenes, many of them prompted directly by Jim Langford's efforts. And we'll confront the uncomfortable reality that the investigation into Chad Langford's death did not end when the Army said it did. Because sometimes, the most important part of an investigation begins only after the system believes it's finished. Before you go, make sure you're following Criminally Curious on social media. You can find us on Facebook at Criminally Curious and on TikTok and YouTube at Criminally Curious AL. You can also find everything in one place at our website, criminallycurious.com. If you want to go deeper than the podcast, check out our Patreon at patreon.com/criminallycuriouspodcast. Patreon supporters get early access to new episodes, bonus content, and exclusive material, including Freedom of Information Act files, primary documents, timelines, and case records that don't always make it into the show. Patrons can also participate in a monthly Q&A session designed for serious true crime listeners who want to ask questions, challenge assumptions, and explore the details together. Thanks for listening. Thanks for supporting independent investigative storytelling. And until next time, stay curious.